up, my hippity-dippity homeschoolers out there listening in? Thank you for coming back. And if this is your first time, welcome to the Homesteads and Homeschools podcast. Today is episode number 32, which of course means you can find the show notes at homesteadsandhomeschools.com/032. My guest today is Mr. Jacob Linzy from the Tasting Anarchy podcast. We get into it at the end of the show a little bit about what that is all about, but heads up, it's about tasting wine. And I think they taste a variety of wines over there. You get some of the more expensive, the nice wine that very rarely do we ever get nice wine. I just, much more of a Carlo Rossi guy myself, part of the namesake. But anyway, we got into homeschooling, talking homeschooling. He has an interesting background in school. He's one of those that went into public school, came out, went back in, and he seems to be doing well for himself. He's no worse for wear there, and it has done him well. And you will hear all about that. I did edit today's show a fair bit just because it was long and it went on and it was good and it was enjoyable. And like to keep these things a little shorter, not too short because obviously I ramble like I am right now. But if you want to get the whole interview, you can get that by going to patreon.com/libertyhippie, and for as little as $2.50 a month, you can pick up that full length interview with Jacob, as well as some other things, other goods, other items. We got seeds, stickers, t-shirts. So without further ado, go check out the show notes, homesteadsandhomeschools.com/032. Go listen to Jacob's podcast, and let's go plant those liberty seeds with Jacob Linzy.
I'm the man from the mountain. Won't you come on up? I'm the plowman in the valley with a face full of mud. Yes, I am stumbling, and I know my car won't start. Yes, I am fumbling, and I know I play a bad guitar. From your loving cup, just one drink.
All right, so today my guest is Jacob Linzy. He runs the show over at Tasting Anarchy, where you can find out how much government is in your wine, and I think you'd be surprised how much is actually in there. It's disturbing. And he also does a little get together called Childeberg, which I'll let him tell you about later in the show. But for now, let's talk to Jacob. Jacob, thank you for coming on. Thank you for taking the time out and skipping your dinner or whatever it was and talking to me.
Yeah,
so
no problem.
Appreciate that.
I was having a taco salad. I finished it, and then the dog decided it wanted to lick the bowl. But I'm trying to get this dog to be a little bit better behaved because we just put a deposit down on another of the same breed, and so I'm like, well, I got to bone up on her training because I don't want her to be rubbing off on the other dog.
It's always the way it goes. You get one, and you think I got to get it right before the next one comes along. It's like kids, and then it just never works. Spirals out of control before you know it. Here you are homeschooling them, but you're. I think you said earlier off the air you're like in your 30s, and so you're done with your education, your formal education, I guess, kind of. There's always that extra stuff. We're always learning, that's the thing. You're always really learning. And so this whole idea that school is concentrated in these formative years is, it's something, but it's, I don't know. I like to think that education just keeps going. I mean, I know the things that I've learned since graduating high school and college are just, through the roof. But what was your education like coming up then? Was it a positive experience, a negative experience?
I was homeschooled through, honestly, we didn't keep track of grades. So I think my mom pulled me out in third grade. So I think it was third grade up until freshman year of high school. I was homeschooled. And up until third grade, my experience was like complete misery. I really, really did not like public school. I think at first I did. And if I recall, like I was really excited to go to school, but because for whatever reason, either they didn't teach me in a way that was conducive to my learning style, or, one of the things they tried to do was diagnose me with learning disability and put me on all sorts of drugs and stuff. And my mom, rightfully so, was just like, nah, we're not putting him on drugs. And the biggest problem I had in school was that I had a really hard time learning how to read. And for some reason, part of it was, and I distinctly remember this because it was fonts. Is that like if I was reading a book and I learned how to read that book with that font, when a different font was shown, I had a really hard time identifying it as a different word or as the same letters across multiple fonts.
That's really interesting to me. Have you read anything elsewhere about other folks experiencing that sort of thing?
No, I never, I kind of lost interest in it because it was just one of those things that eventually it clicked and I was like, oh, this shape is the same as this other shape. They're roughly the same. But to me, when growing up, like I would see like a capital A and, sans serif and then like another one in Times New Roman. And to me, these were very different characters. And I'd be like, how on earth can these be the same letter? And how can they represent the same sound? And that was really difficult for me. And, but it was like one of those things that like, once my mom pulled me out of school and and it clicked and I figured it out, I went from reading like See Spot Run to like the Silmarillion. And so it's like one of those things that's just like my mom knew that I wasn't a dummy or that I didn't have any sort of problems. And she just knew that there was just this one thing that was difficult. But she also knew that I loved to learn before I got into school. And once I got into school, that just kind of crushed, like she said, I would come home lethargic and exhausted and just hating it and always trying to make up all sorts of sicknesses so that I wouldn't have to go. And I liked seeing people there. Like I had friends in school, but it was just one of those things that like, and also I would always argue with the teachers. So like I had this whole campaign going where I riled up all these other kids to be like, if we have to go to this special reading class, we should be excused from all this other homework because we have additional homework. And so like, yeah, like, I was like, we're going to get into class and we're just going to not do it. And then end up being just me not doing it. But, and I would do things too. Like there was also, I had some compliance issues where like when I was in kindergarten, if I got bored, I would just walk home and like show back up home. I was like, school's not out yet. And I was like, yeah, I didn't want to stay. So I left. And yeah,
that's crazy, man.
So I did have kind of this, like, it was like a non-compliant spirit. I just didn't like the way it was done. It was not fun for me. And it was, and I think that's kind of formed a lot of like my opinions, like on forcing people. I mean, this is an entire system. Now, granted, this is all because I was in and out of public schools. This is a system that's, in my opinion, fundamentally derived out of like a violent or implicit violence, saying that like basically if you don't send your kids to school, you're going to go to jail and we're going to take them away from you. And if your kids don't go to school, they're truant, and that's a criminal offense. So I think maybe like on some sort of subconscious level, I understood that, and I just didn't like it.
We just got back from vacation. I just left my kids with my grandparents or with my parents for a couple weeks to like do school. And I was just talking to somebody about that, this whole truancy thing, like I'm allowed to do that. My kids are homeschooled, so I can leave them with, another adult that will school them. And they would not have that opportunity if they were in public school, and my folks are up in New York. I'm down in Georgia, and they just, they need that time with them, and they wouldn't be able to have that. And it's like you said, that whole truancy thing, to think about parents being brought in and CPS getting involved and all this stuff because you missed too many days of school. It's crazy. It's really crazy. I love that you you would walk home from school. I mean, and it's not like you were in school that long ago either. You know, I can't imagine a little kid getting out of school today and walking home.
I think my mom walked me to school the first day up until she pulled me out of homeschool. But the rest of the time I walked myself or rode my bike. And yeah, and it wasn't that long ago. I'm 32 years old now. So this was the early 90s. But yeah, it wasn't that long ago. It was just, for whatever reason, the school was close enough, I guess, that like it was less than a mile away. I think it was maybe 3/4 of a mile away, and we were also kind of free to do what we wanted after school. My mom, it was a small town. It was a lot smaller when my mom was little. It's a lot smaller when I was little than it is now. I mean, it's grown a lot, but just kind of the atmosphere. It was a different time. It was the last of the generation probably where your parents are just like, you can go out and do whatever you want. Just come home when the streetlights come on. And they're just kind of the last generation of that. And it's kind of a sad thing to see go, but there are communities being formed now kind of around that, because I think it's important for kids to just explore.
It is. That's a huge learning tool. I mean, really just getting down into your environment and figuring things out.
Yeah,
that way, hands on.
And there was, so when I got pulled out of school, I have 4 sisters as well. So I was the only one homeschooled at the time. And my other sisters were in public school. My older sister had taken a year out with my grandpa. And he had this, as we were talking before the show, he had a tradition where he would pull one of the grandkids out of school every year and do homeschool with them. Because it's just a good time. He was an old guy, and he wanted to spend some time with the grandkids. Then he ended up having a lot of grandkids because he had 7 kids of his own. So each one of those kids started having kids. So it started getting real big. But so she had some experience outside, but she did a lot better in public school than I did. And then my sister, one down from me, she came out for a year, but she didn't do as well with when you're homeschooled, there is a social aspect to it. Like a lot of people say that you're not socialized and all that sort of stuff. If anybody, I mean, to say that public school is socialization is weird. It's a really bizarre situation that doesn't exist in real life. But my sister, one down from me, did do very well with the social aspect. She just didn't do great with the education aspect of it until she was older. Once she got older, she figured it out, and she was able to do pretty well. My sister, 2 down from me, was like a public school whiz. Like, she was great at it. She's straight A's the entire time, never really had to try, really liked studying, really liked that structure and all that sort of stuff. And then my youngest sister, she was pulled out of school after I had gone back into high school. And she had sort of the same spirit as I had. She didn't do well in public school. It wasn't for her. And she had a lot of the same things where it's for her, I think there was a little bit of a learning issue. She has a very distinct way of learning. And so it was more so the learning issue than it was with me, although I had that problem as well. But for her, it was just not, she just couldn't learn in public school. Like, she would get there and it just was not for her. And she's a smart girl now, and she's much more of a kinesthetic learner and a kinesthetic person too. Like, she's a massage therapist now. And so a lot of the stuff that my mom ended up doing with her was like figuring out what was good for her was like touchy things. So like feeling and doing things with her hands and more emotional type things too, because she's a much more sensitive person than I am. And whereas like for me, a lot of it was I just kind of wanted to be left alone to do my own stuff at my own pace. And then once I did have a hard time learning to read, but once I got that, it was just like, no, let me go at my own pace. And I did go at my own pace. And there was other things too that were interesting. I only wanted to study things that I was interested in studying. So, I did have to. So in California, the homeschooling system back then was you did have to meet with like a person every month. And they would just kind of keep it like you have to show them your curriculum and things like that. And basically my mom and I constructed my curriculum together. So she'd be like, well, this month, what do you want to study? What do you want to know? And I was like, well, I like history a lot. So she would be like, okay, well then we're going to structure your studies around history. And so what we'll do is instead of just like algebra, we'll do history of algebra, and you'll learn how to do the equations that the people who came up with algebra did. and like we'll do, instead of like just like biology, we'll do like history of biology, and you'll learn about that kind of thing. So she did a good job structuring it in that way where it was just like, you're interested in this, we're going to structure your curriculum around that. And then every month we would kind of revisit it.
That's was it just like the standards, if you will, at that time, or what was it that you had to share with that?
Basically, that
person?
You were actually doing something. So like they didn't care, because in California, if you're homeschooled, you get your tax dollars back, or at least you did back then. So whatever you're worth to the public school, you would get that amount of money at home, and you could spend it on whatever you want as long as it was a qualifying educational expense, and pretty much everything was if you justified it. So
right.
So this lady, that was her job basically. She would show up. I can't remember her name actually. She was a really nice old lady, but she was like, I mean, she was ancient. She was like 85 or something like that. She would show up and she'd be like, okay, well, what did you do this month? And we'd have to like just be like, okay, well, I studied this. And she's like, well, do you have any documentation of it? I'm like, no, but I can recite it to you. And then she'd be like, oh, that's fine. Yeah. And so she always passed us. And then at the end of the year, there was this thing called like STAR or something like that you had to, it was a multiple choice test that you had to do. And it was always super easy. So I always passed it. And, but it gave me a really good opportunity to do things like I remember one quarter I wanted to take Taekwondo. And so I just took Taekwondo, and that was like one of my classes. And I met some like cool homeschool kids at Taekwondo, and they were taking rock climbing. So then I was like, well, can I just take rock climbing? We were able to spend my tuition on that kind of thing too. So.
That's I like that. I like that layout. It's nice. At least they give you something.
Well, yeah.
Back, right?
And I don't know if it was the equivalent or whatever, but like, yeah. And then there were certain like subjects my mom didn't know how to teach very well. And so there was this, we called it homeschool school. So it was just basically like all the homeschoolers in the area would rent out this building, and any subject that one parent was really comfortable teaching, but the other parents were not comfortable teaching, they would just be like, hey, I'm going to do this class on this day, and show up if you want to show up, or don't show up if you don't want to show up. And so like I took like world geography or something like that there. And there's like a cultures of the world class that I took where every time you went, you would study some other culture. And, and then what was cool about that too, is my cousins were out, they lived way up in the mountains, kind of really far away. And the public school that was available to them was really far away from their house. And so they just were homeschooled, but they would come down the mountain, and we would meet at the homeschool school, because this is Northern California. It's pretty rural, or especially back then it was rural. I mean, now it's bigger than it used to be, but, it's El Dorado County goes from like almost near Sacramento all the way to Nevada. And then it's also very wide. So this is El Dorado County homeschool school would meet in this area. So you had people coming from almost in Nevada down, and like, traveling all this way, but they would figure out ways to make these outings like educational for their kids. And it was really cool. Now, and you and I mentioned this earlier, is, I don't think in the show, I think it was before, but like in California, a lot of the people that homeschool are very left wing. They're like, like some sort of communists, or like, like anarcho-communists or something like that. A lot of them were, they're just old hippies that and end up having kids. And they were just like, yeah, I'm not going to put them in the corporate school with like the sugar injections and all the medication and all that sort of stuff. I mean, this is like anti-vax stuff. So, a lot of that. But one of the things that's cool about it that people don't get is that they always say that like homeschool kids are desocialized or not socialized. And what they mean is that they're different than other kids because they are unusual. But when you see like a young homeschooled kid, especially in that generation, I don't know what it's like now. I don't know anybody who's young and still homeschooled, but in that generation, we would go out into town as like a gaggle of homeschool kids, and we had no problem interacting with adults. And one of the things that like my mom always taught me was, like so kids nowadays, and I think this is part of the structure of authority, is that they see an adult and they think that that's somebody who has power over them. Whereas in the culture of homeschool that I was brought up in, it was not that they had a power over you. It was that you did have to have respect for them because they're people. but you don't have to listen to them. So like, I almost feel like we were better suited to like avoid, pedophiles or whatever abducting us and stuff, because we just didn't listen. We would just, people would be like, hey, get in my van or whatever. And we'd be like, says who? And it's like,
Yeah.
polite, we say, sir, I'm not going to get in your van. I don't want to help you, find your puppy, and I'm not going to take your candy. And we were very respectful of it, but we would just kind of move on or whatever. It wasn't like, oh, this is an adult telling me what to do, I've got to do it.
I think there's still some truth to that for sure. I know, like, that's always something, right? Oh, the socialization, right? You're going to have these weirdo homeschooler kids that can't socialize, and and maybe you'll get that if you like lock your kid in your basement or something, but
like where there's kids that are my age that the way that their parents did it was not great. But I mean, the thing is that you get regularly kids abused in public school and nobody ever brings this up.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it happens just as much, if not more. I mean, and it might not be the same kind of abuse, but there's definitely, you turn on the news, you look for it. There's sexual abuse happening. There's something new every day, but with the homeschoolers, there's co-ops that pop up. There's groups of homeschoolers that get together and they hang out and they socialize, and they do just fine, and like you said, they do recognize some of that authority, but at the same time, they're not afraid to question that, and maybe that's because they are being schooled with mom and dad, and they see mom and dad make mistakes. They're with you the whole time. They know you make mistakes, and that's okay. It's how you deal with it and how you move on from it. And I think they get that when when you're stuck in a classroom, and I mean, God forbid you question the teacher, these days, even if you're right and you question the teacher, you're going to get, hauled down to the principal's office and have a talking to.
Once I re-entered public school, like learning that was tough for me. Was, I remember my freshman year, I had to take a biology class, and I wasn't opposed to evolution, but they were teaching evolution in the biology class. And I somehow in my mind made this connection that I was like, I can opt out of sex education. Why can't I opt out of this? And so the teacher was like, okay, we're going to go into Darwinism, or, Darwin's theories and stuff. And I'm like, no, we're not doing that. And she's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, where's my slip? And she said, what slip? I'm like, my opt out slip. Like, what if I have religious objections to this? And she's like, well, there's no opt out of this. This is part of you need to learn this for your standardized testing. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing this. and I remember they had to call my mom and be like, look, Jake is causing problems. And she's like, well, I mean, if he doesn't want to learn it, just let him go down to the library or something.
Yeah. You'd think, I mean, it seems like it would be a useful, way to use your time, go down to the library and study something else you like. Well, I mean, that's okay.
By the time I re-entered school, I think it had become, there was a couple of subjects that were really interesting to me, and some of them actually helped me. Like I'm a software developer now, and I got into software development because of classes in high school. And so to that degree, some of them were good, but in the standard subjects and algebra, the various maths and English to a lesser degree, I'm still not a great speller. I read fine and everything, and I'm actually a good writer, but I'm not a great speller. So English, I did have issues, but when it came to writing or reading and that kind of stuff, I had no problem. So the standard subjects, I was kind of bored for the most part. And so I just like to cause trouble. And, but I usually got along really well with the teachers because because most kids are just kind of keep their head down, do their work. Whereas I'm like, well, let's engage. And the teacher's like, holy shit. I haven't been engaged in, the 20 years that I've been studying here, 3 kids have engaged me. I don't think it's good for teachers either. I think the public school model is not good for teachers as well. It's soul sucking for everybody involved.
Yeah, you think about that. You're doing the same thing. Nobody's actually engaging you in any sort of discussion that makes you think or makes you, reevaluate things. Of course, there's all these continuing ed programs you got to take now, but then these continuing ed programs are also all these mandated programs, and they're not necessarily education so much as, theory. It's an interesting thing. So so you were out and you went back in ninth grade, right?
My freshman year in high school.
Now, did you go back in like age appropriate for ninth grade, or were you like
older? I think I think I probably should have gone. So my dad is active duty military, and so he got stationed in Virginia, and the homeschool laws in Virginia are way stricter than California. Well, I don't know if it's surprising, but it's the South. You'd think that it would be more like libertarian, but no. My mom looked into it, and she's just like, Jake, I can't homeschool you. And I was like, well, maybe this is a good opportunity for me to make friends or something. I'm in a new place. I don't know anybody. And so I went back in, and I think I was about a year older because I ended up graduating. I graduated when I was 18, or I did the ceremony and stuff when I was 18, but I left school when I was 19. So I think I'm just maybe a year off. So, but they do the graduation ceremony like 4 months or something like that before you actually are done.
How was that transition?
Like I didn't like it. I didn't like the rigid schedule. When I was homeschooled, I just kind of made it my own schedule. My mom did make me get up in the morning. That was one thing that she was kind of rigid on. So she would be like, you can't just sleep in all afternoon. You got to get up by 8 o'clock because that's when the youngest of my sisters left for school. And then I kind of was free to structure my own day. And then that was the difficult part about going into public school was I was not free to structure my day. It was very rigid, and I didn't care for that. But I had some really, really good teachers that first year that I was back. I think because I used to be like really hardcore kind of neocon conservative because my mom when I was homeschooled every day, my mom would do whatever she needed to do, and she would turn on Rush Limbaugh. And so yes. I was Rush Limbaugh every day. And I would always make sure that whatever work I needed to do on paper, I would do in front of the radio listening to Rush Limbaugh. Because we also didn't have a TV until I was older as well. So radio was kind of like our entertainment.
I remember that, like coming home from school and that would be, my mother would have like Rush Limbaugh on, and like that was, in the car, that was something it would be on. It's funny that
Yeah, well, and we had local, because Rush Limbaugh got started in Sacramento, which is KFBK was the station he got started on, which is the station we received in El Dorado County. And so he was on there really early on. So we listened to him I think he got started in like 88 or 89 on KFBK. So like he was a fixture in the house from when I was before I can remember. And then there was another conservative guy. He wasn't as radical as Rush, but his name was Tom Sullivan. And he started out kind of as like a financial guy. But he was very conservative. So he would kind of get into these conservative type things. And then you had people like Glenn Beck show up later on. And there was other people too. Right. I also, this is how I got into conspiracy stuff, is that late at night, because I also didn't really have a bedtime. I would listen to Coast AM with George Norrie. And then before that was Art Bell. And so I got into weird ghost stuff and things like that too. So radio was a big fixture because we had a TV, but it was like a tiny TV. It was like a 5-inch TV, and it was in my parents' room, and they were the only ones who watched it. My mom kind of was very anti-television. So we didn't have one until we lived with my grandparents. They had one. So anyways, but the transition was interesting, but I had a good perspective on it because my sisters were public schooled. So for me, it was more like, I'm going in, I have to do all these studies and that sort of stuff, but I also get to observe what all of these other people are like. And so I'm going through these different classes, and there were certain classes I thought were valuable. Like I said, my civics class was valuable. My programming class was valuable. My public speaking class was incredibly valuable. I thought it was that actually helped me get several jobs, because I had lots of jobs where I had to be kind of out in front of people, and that helped me kind of calm my nerves when it was an uncomfortable situation. That was a valuable course. I also had a great Latin teacher. He was a Byzantine Catholic monk who taught in the public school. He was a really nice guy though. And I took 3 years of Latin with him. I don't really remember very much of it, but remember him just being a really great teacher. But I also had like terrible teachers. So the adjustment was exactly what I expected. It was like, okay, this is going to be a rigid system. And it's it's basically like Nazi training center. And I'm not going to be free to do the things that I want to do. And I found my own escape for that. I was already working that when I got into my freshman year, I was working under the table as a landscaper and with like a landscaping outfit. And then I did like that summer of my freshman year, I did under the table roofing and gutter cleaning. And I worked at a garden center for a while under the table. And then I worked at the same garden center above the table or over the table or whatever it's called. And then I worked at, so there was things going on where I was more interested in working than I was interested in school. And I still did well in school because, like I said, my standard subjects were just kind of beneath me. Because when you go at your own pace, you can spend a lot of time on the things you don't understand and learn to understand them, and then skip the things that are very easy.
That's something I remember from high school. The things that came easy to me might not come easy to someone else. And so when I get it and then the kid over there doesn't get it and we have to go over it for half an hour, by the end of that half hour, I was either confused, I forgot it, or I was in la la land, like dreaming, because it was just, and so like having the ability to do that with the homeschool kids, like just sit down and go do what you want. And you know what, like, you have a hard time doing something, you just stick with it until you get it, and you have that luxury.
I think what's cool too about the homeschool kids is there's no stigma of how old you are in the subject that you're on, because especially if you have like a little bit of freedom when it comes to what you decide to study, is that you may be like when we did the co-ops and stuff like that. We had kids in the class ranging from 5 years old to high school age, and everything in between. And you're all studying the same thing at your own pace. And the older kids are helping the younger kids. Sometimes the younger kids are helping the older kids if they understand it. So there's this like fluidity and stuff where it's not so rigid on age. It's more of just like, who knows more? And when you get out into the real world, that's the way it is sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't matter if you're 40 years old. Sometimes the kid who's 30 years old knows a lot more about something than you do. And I experience that all the time in my career now. Is like, I'm a software developer. I have to deal with people who are much older than me a lot of times, and they know it. They don't know what I know, but they're very threatened with that. And sometimes they want to like be like, oh, well, he's younger than me. At least this is the way I perceive it, is that they're going like, he's younger than me, I should know more. So I have to kind of like, put my dick on the table or whatever, and like show him all these other things and like tell him how much I make and like what my life is like and all that sort of stuff. And it's like, yeah, bro, I don't really care about those types of things. I'm here to help you. You don't have to tell me all these things. Right. I want you to succeed. I'm going to help you succeed. Let's figure out how this software needs to be developed and what you need from it. And a lot of times, you can kind of, with all of the different things that you learn, the experience you get, is you learn how to treat people who think that this is like an age thing. It's like there's a hierarchy of age. There is no hierarchy of age. Some people know stuff and some people don't. And that's just the way it is.
And it helps reinforce too. Like when you are teaching other people, whether they're older or younger, or you're sharing knowledge and it gives you a different perspective. It helps reinforce what you've learned. Cause now it's one thing to take it in. It's a whole other thing to show somebody else how right, to do it,
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And and
it's a very different skill too. It's a very different skill to know how to show somebody. And, that's like one of the things that I'm learning with my dog right now. Cause I said I was trying to reinforce her training, is like, there are things that I want her to do that it's hard to show her, but like learning how to do that again, going like, oh, that's right. Like she doesn't know any of these. She doesn't know my language. And the same thing, like when you're doing software development, it's like, they don't know my language, and you have to show them, you have to give them very, very clear examples. You have to reward them in different ways when they understand it. And that's the way it is with everybody. It doesn't matter if you're, 5 years old or 95 years old. You always have the capacity to learn. You maybe are going to be better at some things and worse at other things, but you can figure everything out. And it's worth time. It's worth your time to learn. Actually, that's the big takeaway. I just epiphanied myself. That's the big takeaway from being a homeschooler is I was not necessarily taught all of the information that I'm ever going to need to know. But what I was taught and what it was reinforced in me is a love of learning new things and not being afraid to learn new things and not being afraid to fail at new things.
Yeah, that whole failure thing is a big one. Learning to be okay with that. And in a homeschool environment, I think it's much easier to fail and to deal with failure. I think when you get in a classroom, there's that fear of failure, and it's huge because there's the peer pressure that goes with that. You look like an idiot in front of like a bunch of people now instead of just some people that actually care about you, like your parents or your siblings. I think it really reinforces
continual education. And I mean, I kind of to get into the other aspect of the show, the homestead aspect, is there are so many things that I think it's a direct connection to me being homeschooled that I was just like, I just want to try it. And I would do it. And it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. Like, it doesn't matter. One of the things that like I did when I first moved out of my parents' house was I set up an aquaponics system in my garage, and I raised tilapia. I grew all my own vegetables and fruit. My roommate and I lived off of only things that we grew for almost 3 months. And it was tough because we had a quarter of an acre, but we like densely packed the backyard. We had all the tilapia. We were growing stuff above the tilapia. We kind of like switched out some of the tilapia water into the plants so they would grow more. And we were getting really, now we leading up to that, we also did lots of harvest of pickled things and stuff. So we were eating like, for the prior 6 months, we were like storing up pickled items. And by the end of that, we were just like, I hate pickled tomatoes. I don't want to eat any more of these. But, but it was kind of like, it was an experiment that we wanted to do. We were just, he was never homeschooled, but he was kind of just a free spirit in general. And then my second roommate, he was homeschooled, and he was a crazy dude, but he was really super interesting and also kind of the same thing. He was just had no concept of what was normal, and it wasn't relevant to him either. He would never have the question of like, oh, well, it wouldn't be normal to do this. It was just like, no, like let's do it. I read about, actually, I mean, to kind of go off on like a completely different angle, is I listened to one episode of Joe Rogan where he mentioned that you can make your own DMT. And I was like, I want to do that. So I just did it. And like called up my friends and was like, okay, now I have a huge amount of DMT. Who wants some? And it's that kind of like experimentation where it's just like, I'll do it. I'll try to do anything. I'm very, very interested in doing it myself. Whether it continues or not is another thing. Another one, like I just bought when we were coming back from Childeberg, the first one, I was just talking to my wife about a motorcycle, and I was like, yeah, I used to have this scooter and I really liked it, and we're working on it. And she's like, well, why don't you have a motorcycle anymore? And I was like, I don't know, it's a lot of work and stuff. She's like, yeah, you should get one. I think you'd look hot on a motorcycle. And I was like, huh. Okay. And then the next week I had a motorcycle that didn't work, and I've been rebuilding it in the apartment garage, and it runs now. I've been able to run around ride around the block and stuff like that. But it's like one of those things where it's just like, when you're homeschooled, a lot of times your parents don't have the time to necessarily sit down and explain everything to you. They're just like, here, take the book, try to figure it out yourself. And if you get stuck, we'll come and help you later. And I kind of got that thing now. It's like, I bought the book for the motorcycle. I open it up. The motorcycle doesn't work. What are the possibilities that could be wrong with? Like, I understand like general concepts of how an internal combustion engine works. So it's like, okay, so what does an internal combustion engine need? It needs electricity to make a spark. It needs air to make the combustion happen, and it needs fuel. So let's go and figure out where this is not happening. And you go through it, and now, like, now granted, it's one thing after another is wrong with it. It's a 35-year-old motorcycle, but it's one of those things where it's like, I like it. It's fun for me to do it. I like learning new things. I like seeing the fruits of my labor. Whereas when I think in a lot of the public school settings is the fruits of your labor are letters on a standardized test that you probably, when in doubt, Charlie out, you just put C on all the ones you didn't know. And you got enough, you got enough of them right.
Yeah, it is. It's a test score. It's moving on to the next grade. It's a college acceptance letter from who knows where. It is. It's nothing really tangible. I feel like with homeschooling, you're really able to master, certain subject areas that appeal to you, and I don't know, not always there when you only have 40 minutes a day to learn
absolutely.
something.
I mean, you when you're homeschooled, you spend the amount of time you want to spend on a subject, and you move on when you're ready.
So you have a dog?
I got one dog right
dogs?
now. I'm for lack of a better way of putting it, we ordered another one. I mean, these days with the internet, you can just, I put a deposit on. There's a litter of dogs were just born a couple of weeks ago up in Missouri. And we have a Shiba Inu, and I want another Shiba Inu, which is the internet Doge dog.
Yeah, I was going to ask, are you a big Doge fan?
Actually, my wife had the dog before we got married.
Okay. And no kids?
No, not yet, but we're talking about it. So we're planning.
Is that something, if you have kids, would you, I think you'd homeschool them?
So this is actually when before my wife and I got married, this is one of the big conversations that we had, that we were not sure if we were compatible because of this. So like I said, there's no way I'm sending my kids to government school. And she was like, well, she had all the, my wife's actually Ukrainian. She grew up in Ukraine. And so, but what's interesting is she had a lot of the same objections. She's like, wait, what? But worse than Americans, I think. She had never heard of it. She had never even heard that you could possibly be homeschooled. And so she's like, wait, what is this? I don't understand. What is this? And I'm like, no, you teach your kids on your own. Like they decide what they want to learn, and they're free to learn the things that they want to learn. And you kind of direct it. You figure out a way to get them to learn all the things that they need to know, but you make sure that it's their choice. You lead them to water. They still have to drink. And she's just like, the concept to her was so foreign. She's like, how could your parents have kept you out of school? Like, that doesn't make any sense at all. Like, how did you make friends? Like all of the standard objections. Like, I mean, like, she knows I'm kind of weird, but she was like, why aren't you more weird? Why? Like all of these different things. And eventually she's come around. And a lot of it is because I try not to beat people over the head with like my beliefs. And this is kind of what we do on Tasting Anarchy as well. Is it's very public that we're anarchists. But we don't like hammer these anarchist ideas over and over. Is we taste a wine that's pretty neutral, and then we introduce a news story that is relevant to the wine world, and we look at that from the angle where it's like, you may not know this, but the government is doing this to this particular aspect of the wine industry, and that is making it cost probably this much more, or even more than that, or making it difficult for you to get this wine. And so on and so forth, that kind of thing. So it's sort of the same thing where it's just like, I didn't just keep going like, over and over, you've got to homeschool the kids. You've got to homeschool the kids and that stuff. I was like, what about private school? Would you be okay with private school? And she's like, oh yeah, private school. That's probably a better education. I was like, okay. What if it was like homeschool, but we followed like the Ron Paul homeschool curriculum? And we did it with like other homeschool kids in the area. So it'd be kind of like private school, but it would also be homeschool because they would study on their own pace, and they'd kind of figure things out. And if they got stuck, we'd be able to help them out. And she's like, oh, well, that kind of makes sense too. And then eventually, she kind of came around to it, and she was just like, yeah, this makes sense. She was very, very agreeable to, like, because like when we first met, she was like, oh, like, you're an anarchist. That's kind of weird. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, well, how does that even work? And I'm like, well, like the example that won her over, I always bring this up, is I always said, well, would you rather live in an apartment complex that offered you security, or an apartment complex that didn't offer you security? And she was like, oh, one with. And I said, and that's how everything would be paid for. So you would pay the premium for the things you want. And if you don't want them, you just don't pay for them. And you don't use them. And that's how it'll work. There's probably lots of people who don't want security on their apartment because they'll save some money and they've got guns or something like that. So like that made sense to her. And so like over time, like she's kind of come along to this. I always say that she's kind of a natural anarchist because she does sort of have that anti-authoritarian streak, which she recognizes in Ukrainian culture, like a lot of the stuff that is like left over from the Soviet Union, and like how it's been so soul crushing to her people and she's like, nobody's an entrepreneur, and she hates it. She's like, there's so much potential in Ukraine, and they just don't see it because everything is this government corruption and bribes and monopolization through the government and all this sort of stuff. And she recognized that before we even met. Like, she was just like, this is why I don't want to be there. And she ended up coming here, and it's better, but not much better. So
I can imagine that would be. I mean, I don't know my Ukrainian history too deep, but I can imagine that coming through that and experience a little bit of different style of things over here could open some eyes, open some ideas, and make you wonder.
Well, I think it does. She had such a terrible public school experience, like abusive classmates and that sort of thing. And that sort of kind of turned her off of public school. So that's like one of the things that like kind of also brought her over was, you're locked in these schools with these kids who are sometimes just horrible people. Like, they've got whatever's going on at home with them, or the way that they react to the public schooling, whatever it is, there's very often times they just have these just terrible experiences. And she understood that. That was kind of one of the things that, like, explaining, it's like, these kids that were really mean to you and that bullied you and stuff like that, they probably had these terrible things going on at home, or they were not happy about being in school and stuff like that. And that they saw you as the person that this was an opportunity for them to take their aggression out. But what made it worse is that you're locked in that school with them, and you have to see them every day.
Yeah, there's no way out. You're stuck there.
Well, what about how much, like, your kids are homeschooled, correct?
Yeah, we have 4. 3 of them are there. The youngest one will be 3 here in August. So yeah, we're doing that. We pulled our son out he went to kindergarten, and that was that.
Did you guys end up following like a homeschool curriculum, or do you do like unschooling, or?
So we started the very first year we did it. We didn't use a curriculum for my son. We kind of pulled things from here and there, and my wife did a lot of work putting stuff together. And it was really good. We really enjoyed it, and he learned a lot. And since then, we did foster care, and we adopted a couple kids here, and we've just put a little bit more stuff on our plate. Trying to homeschool 3 of them at the same time is a little tougher, and so we've started using Moving Beyond the Page, which is a curriculum that we use. And we like it well enough. There's some things that you skip and you don't use, and I think as we get older, we might look to the Ron Paul homeschool curriculum. But I think I looked at it a little bit, and it seemed, I don't know, a little. I think it's better suited for an older kid, starting to get into that middle school age. I'm not sure how much it would help at the elementary level when you're just kind of, really learning basics, and you can kind of get that from, other things.
Have you ever read Healing Our World by Mary Ruert? So she has this, I don't know if it's real or if it's just like her hypothesizing in the book. She has this thing called like quest schooling, that is it's like a hybrid schooling. So it's a place where kids can go basically, and the way that she describes it, it's like they go to a place and they basically, the way that the teachers are paid is by attracting students. And so you have, the kids will sign in, and then the teachers will be paid based on how many kids sign in. And then they do their self-directed education on computers. And if the parents can't pay for it, then they figure out these different ways to come in. It's a nonprofit model. So it's like, we figure it out. And I've always kind of thought that was a really interesting idea ever since I read the book. And I've talked to my wife about this before. I was like, once we have kids, maybe we should, my ultimate goal is to be able to do all of my work from home. And I can do actually a significant amount of it from home now and make the same amount of money. But I actually work better when I'm away. So I was like, well, what if I got my offices somewhere and we just kind of opened up a facility where kids could come and do self-directed education like Ron Paul or something like that. And it was open. We would be open for 14 hours or something like that, and just have adults there in case there was questions. But for the most part, kids should just come and go as they please, or as their parents, directed them or whatever. And they would be able to study at their own pace, and it would be kind of the same model as this quest schooling, which I just, to me, it sounds like an awesome idea. Like there's got to be like a revolution there has to be a revolution in like homeschool, private school hybridization for these like really shitty parts of like Dallas, like where I live. There are some really terrible parts of Dallas, and the schools there are awful. And these are people they're just locked into these like terrible situations. But not all the kids are like, some of the kids, like I'm not going to say they're a lost cause, but they're just in these family situations that they're not going to get out of, and it's awful. But there's also kids that are then locked in these cages with them, and these kids have nobody else to abuse but the kids that are potentially going to be entrepreneurs or make some difference in the world. And it's like, can't we offer to these people who have kids that are interested in learning, but they don't make a lot of money for whatever reason? Isn't there some way that we can offer an alternative for them to do some sort of self-directed education so that they can actually learn and not be abused all like for 8 hours a day?
It'd be nice. I know, like right in town here, we, a friend of mine just started a co-op where she used to be a guidance counselor. She basically created like a little private school, and she charges tuition and she's got to rent a space. I think they just built a space, so that cost will disappear a little bit to some degree. But yeah, it's something, and I think homeschool is growing. I think some of the, disdain for public school is surmounting. It's just, it's growing. You look at all sorts of numbers that they put out, and it always seems the homeschool numbers getting bigger and bigger every year.
That's why a lot of states are cracking down on it. Like California, I know this from my sister who has kids and still lives there, is that like, it's not as easy as it used to be to homeschool. There's a lot more oversight, and they just don't want kids out of the system. So yeah, that's you get money for butts in the seat, and you don't want to lose that. Eventually there will be. I would like to think that there would be a critical mass that whines loud enough, and people start crying about tax dollars. Your property tax that goes to fund a public school that you're not actually using. It's one thing when it's just a few people in a private school or a couple homeschoolers here and there, but when it starts to be, I don't know what that number is, but at some point it's going to be significant enough that the outcry will be loud enough. I would think too, like the way that the economy is evolving, where parents are allowed to work from home a lot more, and or be nomadic or something like that, is we've got these like digital nomads that population's exploding, and a very similar situation where there's just going to be so many more people who can do it. Like 20 years ago when I was going through school, it was my dad worked full time, and thank God my mom was able to stay home full time. But if they both had to work full time, then there's just no way.
Even think about like the curriculums, the information that's out there. You can find anything you need to know. You can find. It's out there. It's accessible.
When I was growing up, when I was first homeschooled, like the only thing on the internet that existed was chat rooms and Encarta. And Encarta was great, but actually we used Encarta a ton when I was, but it was just not that much there. We actually used chat rooms a lot too. Like I was very active on the internet from a very young age. We got internet in 92.
Okay. You mentioned a little bit about Tasting Anarchy, and I know I mentioned at the top there you do Childeberg. What is that?
Hey, good introduction. So Tasting Anarchy is a show that my co-host and I, Mason, do. Mason and I met through the Liberty Movement about 11 years ago. We both started getting into wine a little bit more. We used to drink a lot of beer together, but he got older. He had a kid. I got older. I got married. And so I just wasn't going out to the bars drinking as often as I used to. And so we would start doing just kind of like sessions where we would sip on wine together. And then I made the decision to move to Texas, and we were best friends. And so he was like, look, we've got to figure out a way to like continue meeting every week and hanging out and doing something. I had done several podcasts before Tasting Anarchy. So like I was familiar with podcasting, and he was like, I've always wanted to do a podcast. I always like hearing you on the podcasts. And he's like, let's do one together. And so he came up with the idea, and he was like, let's do wine. And I think the idea just came up because I was talking about some sort of thing in the news about wine that was like going to make things more difficult for certain wines that we liked. And he was like, this is our opportunity. And I said, and we had also kind of gotten to the point too, where we were sort of tired of the political activism because we didn't really see it come to fruition. I was very, very politically active, and he was kind of passively politically active. And so like I saw over time that there was just these things that were not working. And then my final straw was 2012. I was running Gary Johnson campaign in before the Republican primary was over. The young Republicans of Virginia Beach had asked me to come and do help with Ron Paul. And I was like, you know what, I'll do help with Ron Paul, but the agreement will be, I'll help you guys with Ron Paul and that. But when Ron Paul loses, the closest candidate to Ron Paul is not Mitt Romney. It's Gary Johnson. So when Ron Paul loses, you guys come over and help me with Gary Johnson. And they were like, yeah, we're really libertarians. I mean, we just are supporting Ron Paul because he's the one who could possibly win. So I was like, okay, yeah, let's do this. And so, he loses, and I call up the chair of the young Republicans, and I say, all right, time for you guys to come and help me with Gary Johnson. They went, yeah, we're supporting Mitt Romney. And I was like, okay. I said, okay, then you guys will never see me in politics again. We will not work together. I'll finish out the Gary Johnson campaign, and that will be it. That was my final straw on that, where I was just like, look, politics is not where I'm going to make a difference for some reason. What I need to do is I need to figure out cultural things or things that are interesting that attract people who are not necessarily libertarians, and show them how the libertarian or anarchist perspective benefits them in this area of something they're passionate about. And that's kind of how we started getting into the wine thing, is that people who are really into wine, people who are probably going to be listening to our show that are not already libertarians or anarchists, they have a passion for wine through doing just basic reviews of wine and talking about wine in different ways. But at the same time, as is the case with all of alcohol, it is so heavily influenced by government regulation and intervention.
Yeah, just a taste.
Taste, exactly.
Just give them a little bit of it.
Taste anarchy. Just think about it like, if we got government out of this, how are other ways that we could solve these problems?
There are problems, and they can be fixed. And when the government gets involved more often than not, it might fix a problem, but it usually lends itself to more problems. And if you just kind of left it alone, sort itself out. Things
always sort themselves out. People figure it out. It's just that having the government as an option is a big hindrance, because then people are waiting around forever.
All right. And any parting words on Childeberg?
Childeberg it's coming up. It's May 23rd and 26th in 2020. If you want to experience just sort of a free market festival, it's going on at the same time as the Libertarian National Convention this year. And it's only 20 minutes away from the Libertarian National Convention. So if you're interested in going to the Libertarian National Convention, we're going to be running a van in between. We're calling it the Childozer. And so the van will come and pick you up at the LNC, drop you off at Childeberg, and then drop you back off if you want to go back later on. We're planning on running it every 3 hours or so. We're going to be starting signups in September. So go over to childeberg.com and sign up for our newsletter, and we'll let you know when it's ready to sign up for his campsite.
All right. Sounds good. I will throw that link in the show notes. What is the link to that? What is that? Just
childeberg.com. It's
all right.
Childerburg. So it's like a play on Bilderberg.
All right. Well, I will put that in the show notes, and if people want to check that out, they can. It's a little far for me. I don't think I'll get there this year. Maybe one of these years when the kids are a little bit older, I can. That's Jacob. It was fun. It's most of the people that I've talked to thus far have all kind of come. Most of them come out of the public school and gone into the homeschool realm, and that's about it. I don't think a lot of people have bounced back and forth like Jacob did. And as you can tell, he's doing well, and he's doing well for himself. And once you come out of school, once you go homeschool, they're not gonna tell you can't come back. So it's always, if you're ever thinking about it, do it and try it for a year, try it for a couple of years, try homeschooling. And if it doesn't work, they can't tell you can't come back. So you got that on your side. Anyway, thanks again for hanging out today, for listening in, and leaving those reviews on iTunes, because I know somebody's going to do it. I know one of you out there is going to leave a review on iTunes, and so I thank you in advance for doing so. And you guys have a great week, and I'll catch you next week. Get out there, sow those seeds of liberty. We can all reap sheaves of freedom together.
I'm gonna ride a hustler's dream.